Jonas Greenfield tugged at the stiff collar of his Vorax Intergalactic Academy robes as he stepped into the vast crystalline courtyard. Sunlight, or whatever the Academy simulated as sunlight, streamed through towering spires that refracted colors in all directions. The air hummed with the sounds of alien life. Clicking, thrumming, chittering. Students from dozens of species filled the space, gliding, striding, or slithering toward their next destination. For Jonas, one of only a handful of humans admitted to the prestigious institution, the sight still took some getting used to. Beside him, Pebble trotted confidently, her tiny terrier body dwarfed by everything around her. Despite her size, she held her head high, ears perked, as she sniffed curiously at the vibrant, floating flora lining the walkways. Jonas had expected some stares. Humans were new to the galactic stage, but the intensity of the attention surprised him. Is that thing alive? Jonas turned to see Rulora, a tall, iridescent Gorvanian with a sleek, reptilian build. Her scaled body shimmered in shifting blues and greens, and her slitted eyes narrowed as she examined Pebble. Flanking her were Yelt, a gangly, multi-jointed being whose limbs moved with unsettling fluidity, and Vez, a bulbous, multi-eyed creature that seemed perpetually amused by everything. Yes, Jonas replied evenly, giving Pebble an affectionate scratch behind her ears. Her name is Pebble. Pebble? Pebble twitched, as if the very name offended her. That is, what do you humans call it? Cute? I suppose it's an appropriate name for something so small and useless. Pebble tilted her head, then let out an energetic yap as if to protest the insult. Jonas smirked. She's more than cute. She's clever, loyal, and braver than most beings twice her size. Bravery? From that? Vez's voice crackled with static-like laughter. She doesn't even have claws, or fangs, or armor? Jonas straightened, a flash of irritation rising in his chest. She doesn't need those things to be effective. Rulora crouched to Pebble's level, her forked tongue flicking in and out as she studied the little dog. I don't understand, she said finally. How does something like this survive? What purpose does it serve? Purpose isn't always obvious, Jonas replied, meeting her gaze. Sometimes it takes a bit of imagination. Pebble wagged her tail and stepped forward, sniffing at Rulora's clawed hand. The Gorvanian recoiled slightly, her eyes narrowing further. Imagination, she muttered, straightening. Humans and their sentimentality. We'll see how far it gets you. The trio moved on, their laughter echoing faintly behind them. Pebble watched them go, then looked up at Jonas with wide, questioning eyes. You're fine, girl, Jonas said, crouching to rub her head. They'll learn eventually. Jonas wasn't entirely sure why the Academy had approved his request to bring Pebble. He'd made his case during the application process, citing the psychological benefits of having a companion animal during interspecies studies. It felt like a gamble at the time, but for reasons he still didn't fully understand, they'd agreed. Perhaps they'd wanted to see what would happen when a human pet was introduced to the most advanced minds in the galaxy. Whatever the reason, Jonas was determined to show them that Pebble wasn't just a pet, she was an asset. Later that day, Jonas sat in the Academy's domed lecture hall, surrounded by an eclectic mix of beings. The room itself was a marvel of technology. A spherical space with holographic displays suspended in midair, each one adjusting its content to the viewer's unique visual perception. At the center of the room hovered Professor Clint, a translucent, jelly-like entity whose pulsating bioluminescence shifted in time with his speech. Symbiosis, Clint intoned, his voice resonating like a deep gong. The cornerstone of survival in countless ecosystems. Beings working together, their relationships ranging from mutualistic to parasitic. As Clint spoke, the room filled with projections of alien creatures in symbiotic partnerships, massive predators with symbionts cleaning their teeth, towering herbivores with root-like growth sprouting from their backs, feeding off their host's nutrients in exchange for protection. The variety was astounding, a testament to the galaxy's complexity. Clint's glowing form turned toward the students. "Humans," he said, addressing Jonas directly, "your species is known for its unusual adaptability. Tell us, do you have an example of symbiosis from your world?" Jonas hesitated, feeling the weight of dozens of alien eyes on him. He glanced down at Pebble, who was curled up by his feet, seemingly oblivious to the scrutiny. "Dogs and humans," Jonas said finally. "We've worked together for tens of thousands of years. Dogs helped us hunt, protected us, and even acted as our early warning systems. In return, we gave them food, shelter, and companionship." Clint pulsed with interest. "Fascinating. And does this partnership persist?" "Absolutely," Jonas said. "Dogs are still our companions. They're part of our families. They might not hunt or guard as often anymore, but they give us something more important: loyalty and trust." Rilora's hand shot up, her claws clicking together as she gestured for attention. "But your species no longer requires hunting for survival, nor do you face significant physical threats in your homes. So what use does this dog have now?" Jonas met her gaze, his voice steady. "Not everything is about survival. Some bonds go deeper than that. Dogs teach us things that tools and technology can't, about trust, about courage, about finding joy even in the smallest moments." Rylora tilted her head, her eyes narrowing in skeptical amusement. "Joy is hardly a strategy for survival." The room buzzed with murmurs, some curious, others amused. Jonas knew he wouldn't change everyone's mind with words alone. "Perhaps," Clint said, his body pulsing faintly, "we shall see these qualities in action." As the lecture ended, Jonas felt a mix of pride and frustration. He believed in everything he'd said about Pebble, but the dismissive attitude of his classmates lingered in his mind. Outside the hall, Rylora and her group caught up with him again. "That was an enlightening defense of your creature," Rylora said, her tone thick with mockery. "Perhaps we'll get to see how much joy it brings when you inevitably face a real challenge." Jonas gave a thin smile, refusing to take the bait. Instead, he glanced down at Pebble, who wagged her tail, completely unfazed by the attention. "They'll learn," he murmured to her as the trio walked away. "They just don't know it yet." Pebble yipped in agreement, her small frame radiating an unwavering confidence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jonas knew she was ready to prove herself, again and again if necessary. Jonas and Pebble found themselves standing at the edge of the Academy's training grounds the next day, staring into the dense, otherworldly jungle that stretched before them. The sky above shimmered with the hazy green glow of the simulated environment dome, and faint, bird-like screeches echoed in the air. The challenge ahead would test the students' teamwork, survival instincts, and resourcefulness. For Jonas, it would also be Pebble's first chance to demonstrate what she was truly capable of. "Today's exercise," Professor Clint's voice echoed through their comm units, "will require your teams to locate and recover an artifact hidden deep within the simulated jungle. Be vigilant. Obstacles and threats will test your coordination and decision-making. Remember, success depends on your ability to adapt." Jonas adjusted the strap on his lightweight pack, giving Pebble an encouraging pat. "Ready for this, girl?" Pebble responded with a happy bark, her tail wagging. The moment the simulation began, Rylora, Yelt, and Vez turned toward Jonas. Let's establish one thing, Relora said, her tone curt. Your pet stays out of the way. This is serious, and we don't have time for distractions. She won't be a distraction, Jonas said, keeping his voice calm but firm. Pebble's part of the team. Yelt's multi-jointed limbs shifted uneasily. If she slows us down... She won't, Jonas interrupted, his eyes narrowing. You'll see. Relora snorted but waved him off. Fine, just don't get in our way. The jungle was alive with movement and sound. Massive trees with bioluminescent roots twisted toward the sky, while strange, gelatinous plants pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Every few minutes the ground vibrated faintly, a reminder that some of the obstacles were very much alive. Pebble trotted confidently ahead of Jonas, sniffing at the ground and occasionally pausing to investigate curious smells. Jonas trusted her instincts completely. She was sharper than any sensor he'd ever used. The first obstacle came sooner than expected. As the team moved through a narrow ravine, a faint clicking sound echoed from the walls. Pebble froze, her body tense. She let out a sharp bark, and Jonas immediately crouched to assess the situation. What's she doing now? Relora asked, clearly annoyed. Quiet, Jonas said, holding up a hand. He spotted it a second later, a cluster of small, spider-like drones clinging to the rock walls. Their reflective shells glimmered faintly in the dim light, and they seemed dormant, for now. Movement might wake them, Jonas whispered. We need to go slow. Pebble barked softly, her tail wagging as if to say she understood. Jonas motioned for the others to follow his lead. The team moved carefully, with Pebble leading the way. Her small size made her nearly silent as she navigated the uneven terrain. When one of Yelt's limbs accidentally brushed against a loose stone, the drones twitched, their red sensors flickering to life. Pebble let out a low growl, then darted ahead, barking loudly to draw the drone's attention away from the group. Pebble, no, Jonas hissed, but she was already in action. The drones scrambled after her, their sharp legs clattering against the rocks. Pebble led them in a frantic chase, zigzagging through the ravine and keeping just out of their reach. With the path momentarily clear, Jonas signaled the team to move. Is she crazy? Vez buzzed, his voice crackling with disbelief. No, Jonas said, his jaw tight. She's smart. Pebble reappeared moments later, her tongue lolling out as she trotted back to Jonas unharmed. Behind her, the drones had given up the chase, settling back into their dormant state. Relora stared at Pebble, her slitted eyes narrowing. That was unexpected. Jonas grinned, crouching to rub Pebble's head. Told you. She's not just a pet. As they pressed deeper into the jungle, Pebble continued to prove her worth. She sniffed out hidden tripwires and motion-activated traps long before the team could stumble into them. At one point, she even discovered a patch of alien moss that released a hallucinogenic mist when disturbed, barking sharply to warn Yelt before he stepped on it. Okay, Eout admitted grudgingly, his limbs twitching in agitation. She's not useless. Pebble wagged her tail, oblivious to the backhanded compliment. The final leg of the challenge brought them to a massive clearing dominated by a towering ancient tree. The artifact they sought, a glowing holographic cube, was suspended high in its branches. There it is, Relora said, pointing with one clawed hand. But it's guarded. Beneath the tree prowled a sentinel drone, its quadrupedal frame bristling with weaponry. Its optical sensors scanned the area in precise, rhythmic sweeps. Direct confrontation isn't an option, Relora said, crouching behind a fallen log. We need a distraction. Jonas knelt beside her, glancing at Pebble. I've got one. Not this again, Vez muttered. The dog. Yes, Jonas said, his voice steady. Pebble's small enough to stay hidden and fast enough to avoid the drone. She can lure it away while we get the artifact. You're putting all of this on her? Yelt asked. Jonas shook his head. She's not doing it alone. I trust her, and she trusts me. Relora looked skeptical, but didn't argue. Fine. But if this fails, it won't, Jonas said, giving Pebble a quick command. Pebble crouched low, her body tense with focus. With a sharp bark, she darted into the clearing, weaving through the tall grass. The Sentinel's sensors locked onto her immediately, and it began to move, its mechanical limbs pounding against the ground. As the drone pursued Pebble, Jonas and the team sprang into action. Relora scaled the tree with remarkable speed, using her claws to climb, while Yelt and Vez provided cover from below. Jonas kept his eyes on Pebble, his heart pounding as she led the Sentinel in a wide circle, staying just out of reach. When Relora retrieved the artifact, Jonas whistled sharply. Pebble immediately changed direction, darting toward the tree line where Jonas was waiting. The Sentinel tried to follow, but became entangled in the dense underbrush. Pebble reached Jonas moments later, panting but unharmed. He scooped her up, grinning as he cradled her in his arms. Good girl. The team regrouped at the edge of the clearing, the artifact safely in hand. Even Relora couldn't hide her begrudging admiration as she glanced at Pebble. I'll admit, she said slowly, she's more capable than I thought. She's full of surprises, Jonas replied, giving Pebble another pat. When the team returned to the academy, Professor Clint was waiting. His translucent form pulsed with faint bluish light as he regarded them. Well done, Clint said. You completed the challenge with minimal arrows, and it seems your companion played a significant role. Jonas smiled. She always does. Pebble wagged her tail, yipping cheerfully as if she understood the praise. The other students in the training grounds watched as Jonas and Pebble walked past, their murmurs a mix of curiosity and newfound respect. Pebble had proven herself once again, and Jonas knew this was only the beginning. Ready for the next one, girl? Jonas asked softly. Pebble barked in reply, her tail wagging furiously. She was more than ready. Jonas didn't have long to savor Pebble's victory in the jungle simulation. Her newfound reputation at Vorax Academy began to ripple outward, drawing attention from both peers and faculty. While some students were genuinely impressed, others viewed Pebble as an anomaly, a curiosity rather than a true asset. Jonas had no doubt Pebble could handle whatever came next, but he hadn't expected how quickly the Academy would put her and him to the test again. It began with an official-looking message that appeared on Jonas's datapad during his morning study session. Subject field deployment request. Priority level high. Jonas read the details twice, then a third time. The message was brief and to the point. He and Pebble had been selected to join an advanced practical field study under the supervision of Professor Clint. The mission was to investigate a coalition scout ship recently discovered adrift in the Nozari Nebula. No way, Jonas muttered, glancing down at Pebble, who was sprawled out beside him, chewing contentedly on a treat. She looked up at him with curious eyes. You're about to earn your keep again, Jonas said with a grin. Jonas arrived at the designated launch bay an hour later, where a sleek silver shuttle hummed with readiness. Standing nearby were Relora, Yelt, and Vez. You've got to be joking, Relora said as Jonas approached with Pebble trotting by his side. Jonas shrugged. Good to see you too. We're investigating a derelict vessel in one of the most unstable nebulae in the sector, Relora said, crossing her arms. And they sent... Here? She pointed one claw at Pebble, who wagged her tail cheerfully. Seems like the Academy trusts her more than you do, Jonas replied. Let's hope they're not wrong, Vez muttered, Yelt clicked his multi-jointed limbs nervously. This mission feels different, bigger. If something goes wrong... Nothing's going to go wrong, Jonas said, more to himself than to them. Professor Clint's glowing form appeared at the top of the shuttle ramp. If you are finished deliberating, he said, his voice resonating faintly, we have a mission to complete. The shuttle cut through the swirling gases of the Nozari Nebula with eerie precision. Outside the viewport, glowing clouds of ionized particles danced and shifted, their beauty masking the dangers they posed. The ship's shielding flickered occasionally as stray charges grazed its surface. As they approached the derelict scout vessel, the mood inside the shuttle grew tense. The vessel loomed ahead, its hull blackened and scarred. Faint light still flickered from within, but the ship was eerily still, like a ghost, drifting in the nebula's embrace. Scans indicate minimal life support and no active propulsion, Clint said as the shuttle docked. You are to retrieve the vessel's data core and investigate any signs of surviving crew. Proceed with caution. The docking clamps locked into place and the airlock hissed open. Jonas tightened Pebble's harness, crouching to meet her eyes. Stay close, okay? She licked his hand in response. The interior of the scout ship was dark and cold, its corridors dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. The faint hum of life support systems provided the only sound. Rylora took the lead, her claws clicking against the metal floor as she scanned for hazards. Yelt and Vez followed, with Jonas and Pebble bringing up the rear. Pebble sniffed the air, her movements cautious but curious. Jonas trusted her instincts. If something was wrong, she'd sense it before anyone else. The first sign of trouble came as they approached the central data core. Pebble froze mid-step, her body tense. A low growl rumbled in her throat. What is it? Rylora asked, stopping in her tracks. Jonas knelt beside Pebble, scanning the corridor ahead. She senses something, probably not good. As if on cue, a shadow shifted at the edge of the flickering light. A mechanical whir followed, and a security drone emerged from a side corridor. Its skeletal frame sparked with exposed wiring, and its optical sensor glowed in ominous red. Malfunctioning, Rylora hissed, raising her claws. Definitely hostile, Yelt added, his limbs twitching. Before anyone could act, the drone's weapon systems powered up, its mounted blaster charging with a high-pitched whine. Pebble, go, Jonas shouted. Pebble sprang into action, barking furiously as she darted toward the drone. The machine's sensor locked onto her, its blaster firing a series of rapid bursts. But Pebble was too fast. She zigzagged unpredictably, her small size making her a difficult target. It still thrummed between him and the laser tower. While the drone focused on Pebble, Rylora leapt forward, her claws slicing through its exposed circuits with precision. The drone collapsed in a shower of sparks, and Pebble trotted back to Jonas, her tail wagging triumphantly. Unbelievable, Vez said, staring at the fallen drone. She actually did it again! She's resourceful, Jonas said, scratching behind Pebble's ears. And fearless. Rylora grunted, her gaze lingering on Pebble. I hate to admit it, but she's more useful than I gave her credit for. Pebble barked as if accepting the compliment. The team reached the data core without further incident, extracting the encrypted files as instructed. But as they made their way back to the shuttle, they encountered an unexpected complication. A stasis pod tucked into a hidden alcove. The pod contained a small insectoid being, its fragile body barely clinging to life. The readouts indicated it was a member of the scout crew, but its condition was critical. We can't leave it behind, Jonas said, his tone firm. Rylora sighed. And how do you propose we carry it back while avoiding any other drones that might still be active? Pebble stepped forward, sniffing at the stasis pod. She barked once, then nudged the pod gently with her nose. Jonas grinned. She's volunteering to help. Together, the team carefully maneuvered the pod through the ship's narrow corridors, with Pebble barking occasional warnings whenever her sharp senses detected potential danger. By the time they reached the shuttle, everyone was exhausted but relieved. Back at the Academy, the decrypted data from the scout ship revealed critical information about the nebula's unstable properties, earning praise from the Coalition. The rescued crew member was transferred to medical care, and Pebble's role in the mission quickly became the subject of campus-wide admiration. "She's not just a pet," Jonas told anyone who asked. "She's a partner." Pebble, as always, seemed oblivious to the attention, happy to wag her tail and accept any extra treats that came her way. Even Relora eventually came around, though she'd never admit it openly. "She's tolerable," Relora said one day, watching Pebble chase a holographic projection in the courtyard. "For a human companion, anyway." Jonas laughed. "Coming from you, I'll take that as high praise." Pebble barked, spinning in a happy circle before trotting back to Jonas's side. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jonas knew one thing for sure. His tiny terrier would be ready to face them. Jonas and Pebble's success on the mission to the Nozari Nebula had shifted perceptions across the Academy. Pebble was no longer viewed as a mere curiosity or an oddity. Her name now echoed in conversations around the sprawling crystalline campus, earning her nicknames like the Tiny Sentinel and Guardian Pup of Earth. However, not everyone had warmed to the idea of a human companion animal being more capable than they'd assumed. While many students admired Pebble, others saw her as a challenge to their species' superiority. Relora, Yelt, and Vez, though gradually more supportive, still had trouble fully accepting the tiny terrier as a teammate. The Academy's leadership, however, saw an opportunity. That opportunity came in the form of the annual Interspecies Diplomacy Stimulation, a galaxy-renowned event that tested students' ability to navigate complex cultural, political, and strategic scenarios. For the first time, Jonas and Pebble were selected to represent humanity. The simulation began in the holosphere, the Academy's most advanced training chamber. The vast dome space transformed into a sprawling, immersive projection of an alien capital city. Towering spires glinted with simulated sunlight, and streets buzzed with holographic citizens from dozens of species. The exercise's premise was simple but challenging. Each team would represent a fictional interstellar faction in negotiations. Jonas's team, which once again included Rylora, Yelt, and Vez, was assigned the role of the Crythan Dominion, a coalition of species teetering on the edge of internal collapse. Their task was to stabilize their faction, uncover hidden threats, and negotiate peace with rival groups. Jonas adjusted his team-issued insignia and crouched beside Pebble, who sniffed curiously at the holographic ground. "Ready, girl?" he whispered. Pebble yipped softly, her tail wagging. "Well, let's establish one thing right now," Relora said, her tone clipped as she reviewed the mission briefing. "This is diplomacy. No running around or barking at drones. Keep her under control, Jonas." Jonas shot her a sidelong glance. "You'd be surprised how useful barking can be." Yelp clicked his limbs nervously. "The Crythan Dominion is on the brink of collapse. If we mess this up, our faction could trigger a galactic war, simulated or not." Vez hummed in agreement. "Let's try not to fail spectacularly, shall we?" Before Jonas could reply, a booming voice echoed across the holosphere. "Attention! A series of sabotage events has disrupted critical infrastructure in the Crythan capital. Your task is to identify the infiltrators, secure your resources, and stabilize your faction's leadership. Begin." The city around them buzzed to life, and Jonas's team set to work. The first challenge emerged quickly. A series of holographic reports came through the team's simulated communication network. Power outages in key districts, an agricultural hub rendered inoperable, and a high-ranking official abducted by a rival faction. "This is deliberate," Relora said, her claws tapping on a holographic display. "No random event disrupts this many systems at once." Jonas glanced at Pebble, who was sniffing intently at the air. "It's sabotage. The question is, who's behind it?" Pebble barked suddenly and began tugging at Jonas's sleeve. He followed her gaze to a nearby marketplace, bustling with holographic citizens. "She's onto something. Let's check it out." Relora rolled her eyes but didn't protest as the team followed Pebble into the market. The marketplace was chaotic, filled with stalls selling holographic wares and vendors shouting in simulated alien languages. Pebble darted ahead, weaving between the crowds and stopping abruptly at a stall covered in glowing fruit-like objects. "She's barking at fruit?" Vez muttered. "No," Jonas said, crouching to inspect the stall. "She's found something." Underneath the stall, hidden among its supports, was a faintly shimmering device. It pulsed softly, emitting a low hum. Jonas recognized it instantly as a disruptor. "This is one of the sabotage devices," he said. Relora crouched beside him, her slitted eyes narrowing. Clever. Hidden in plain sight. As Jonas worked to disable the disruptor, a group of holographic agents in rival faction uniforms appeared at the edge of the market. They began questioning vendors aggressively, their weapons visible but holstered. "They're looking for something," Yelt said nervously. "Or someone," Vez added. Pebble let out a low growl, sensing the rising tension. Jonas glanced at her, an idea forming in his mind. "We can't let them find this device," Jonas whispered. "It could spark a conflict between our faction and theirs." "So what's the plan?" Relora asked. Jonas gave Pebble a quick, reassuring pat. "Pebble, distract them." Pebble barked sharply and darted into the crowd, weaving between holographic citizens and drawing the agent's attention. They turned toward the commotion, their focus shifting away from the stall. "Has he lost his mind?" Vez hissed. "Just trust her," Jonas said, finishing the deactivation process. Pebble led the agents on a wild chase through the marketplace, her small size and agility allowing her to stay just out of reach. By the time they gave up and moved on, Jonas had safely removed the disruptor. "She did it," Yelt said, his voice tinged with awe. "She always does," Jonas replied, motioning for Pebble to return. As the simulation progressed, Pebble continued to play an integral role. She sniffed out 2 more disruptors hidden in critical infrastructure sites and even identified a disguised infiltrator posing as a Krithan diplomat. By the final phase of the exercise, the team had gathered enough evidence to prove that a rogue third-party faction was behind the sabotage, aiming to destabilize the Krithan Dominion and incite a war with their rivals. Armed with this information, Jonas led the team into the simulation's Grand Council chamber to present their findings. The council chamber was an awe-inspiring projection of alien opulence, with towering pillars of light and holographic banners displaying the insignias of various factions. Rival representatives glared at each other across the room, their voices rising in heated argument. Jonas stepped forward, Pebble at his side. "We have evidence that neither the Krithan Dominion nor its rivals are responsible for the recent disruptions," he said, his voice steady. "The real culprit is a third-party faction, seeking to profit from our conflict. Here's the proof." As Jonas presented the evidence, Pebble barked sharply, drawing attention to a holographic display of intercepted communications. The room fell silent as the council reviewed the data, their expressions shifting from skepticism to reluctant agreement. By the end of the simulation, the team had successfully negotiated peace and stabilized their faction's leadership. Back in the real world, the holosphere dissolved around them, leaving Jonas and his team standing in the Academy's gleaming training chamber. "You passed the simulation with exceptional marks," Professor Clint said, his glowing form pulsing faintly. Particularly impressive was the contribution of your companion. Jonas smiled, crouching to give Pebble an affectionate pat. She's the real MVP. Pebble barked happily, spinning in a small circle as if celebrating. Relora approached, her expression unreadable. "I'll admit," she said slowly, "I didn't think much of her at first, but she's proven me wrong, more than once." Jonas chuckled. She has a habit of doing that. From that day forward, Pebble wasn't just a respected member of Jonas's team. She was a symbol of what humanity could bring to the galaxy: loyalty, ingenuity, and a knack for turning the smallest assets into the greatest strengths.